When I was a kid in the 90s, I used to seriously hate going to school. There would be at least one day a month where I would wake up and have it decided in my head that I was staying home. I'd do whatever it took, pretend to puke, glue myself to the toilet, cry, you name it, I'd do it. I'd do it because it worked. My parents were working class, all-day laborers, and couldn't afford to stay home or argue with me. By the time I was in 4th grade, 10 years old, they'd cave and just let me stay home alone, the days that I pretended to be sick. I remember one morning waking up and not having to fake it. My stomach was in knots, my throat was on fire, and I couldn't even keep my own spit down. Seemingly anything had me throwing up. Like usual, my parents got me a can of chicken noodle soup and then set the whole thing in a bowl on the stove and told me to read the instructions for microwaving if I felt hungry again. I never even got out of bed and off they went. Even my sister was gone, running to catch the bus. Because of my habit of staying home, I was hell-bent on having some fun, even at the cost of a little discomfort. I lounged in the recliner, what I considered a gaming chair, and played some of my favorite video games. I watched cartoons, game shows, all the usual stuff that was on throughout the mornings in the early 2000s. Once it became mostly talk shows, I flicked the TV off and ventured around the house a bit. My room was on the 2nd floor, but I had my own bookshelf and my own TV and PlayStation, even my own bathroom upstairs. The only thing that required me to go downstairs was to find something to eat. The bathroom upstairs was around the corner from my room, at the end of the hall. For no particular reason, this bathroom creeped me out from day one. I personally believe in ghosts and stuff like that as a kid. Again, for no real reason. I cooked up the idea that in my head, sometimes I saw things down there at the end of the hallway. The reality was there was a window way up high on the wall. It would cast odd shadows down at the base of the wall. I knew this, but liked to scare myself and my friends whenever they came over. Being home alone and needing to take a leak, I decided I would go downstairs to both use the bathroom and investigate our fridge. As I got up, I kind of sidestepped into the hallway, and of course saw something weird out of the side of my eye. It looked like a big looming man in the corner of the hall. Now this spooked me, and I booked it downstairs and waited. Nothing. I figured if it was a real person, I'd hear them walking. As you can imagine, I was alone. I go into the bathroom and do my business, and then head to the kitchen. The fridge was right beside our front door, so as I'm looking inside, I'm parallel to the front doorknob. I'm looking around and not finding anything that I can stomach, when I hear something weird, a jingling. I look over and exactly what I thought was happening. The front doorknob was wiggling back and forth. It's locked, thank God. My parents were security prone. The deadbolt was even locked, but still, I knew immediately that this was not anyone that lived here. We lived in a pretty good neighborhood, average sized suburb, but in my mind at the time, anything was possible. Beside the door is a big window, and something moves back and forth beyond the curtain. I watch in total horror as some skinny old guy leans over with his hands cupped to the glass and peers inside. His eyes go left, then right, and they fall on me, and this big, awful smile stretches across his face. He taps on the glass like I'm some animal at the zoo. I remember slamming the fridge closed so hard that I could hear everything shift around inside. For some reason, probably adrenaline, I thought that my mom was gonna kill me when she got home and opened up the fridge and found the booby trap that I just made. I remember being more worried about that than the guy looking in the window. Again, I was like 10 or 11 when this happened, so I fancied myself a strapping young man in my head. I was also used to staying home alone and had dealt with a lot of different people coming to our door. Electricity and water department workers, gas gauge checkers, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and any other number of people prone to knocking. I ran through a mental checklist as I looked this creep up and down. He definitely wasn't here to see my mom or dad. Definitely wasn't on the clock. He wasn't even knocking. I mean, if there's a red flag, this guy was firmly holding it in his hand. "Hey, why don't you come open up the door?" he said, pointing down to the handle. "I was just here yesterday." My head starts swimming. The hell is this guy talking about in here yesterday? Does he work for my dad? Does he know my older sister? I took a step forward because I was so caught off guard. He almost got me for a second. I was about to open up the door out of denial hoping there was some sort of rational explanation. I caught myself after that first step, shook my head. No way, dude. He then shook his head too, and then kicked the house siding hard as hell, hard enough to make me jump. The whole kitchen was behind me, and the stairs off to the right of the room where the living room began. On the far side of the kitchen, there was a little hallway that led back to my parents' room, plus the laundry room, a bathroom, and then the side entrance for the garage. When I remembered the garage, this entire plan springs into action in my head. To this day, I've never had a more clean, pragmatic line of thinking as I did that day. It kind of bums me out, to tell you the truth. And I've been told it's because that's the only time my life has ever been on the line. Anyway, we kept a lot of things in the garage, like our camping and outdoor gear. This also included my cheap Walmart special paintball gun. It was one of those clear gray pump-action pistols. Took the CO2 cylinder in the bottom of the handle and slung a paintball hard enough to break a window. I know that from experience. I grabbed it, immediately changed the cylinder out of habit because I knew whatever the hell was in there had to be dead. I slammed a couple of handfuls of paintballs into the hopper. Good to go. I looked down though and saw something else that we kept in the garage. A splitting log, which had a hatchet sticking out of the top. I yanked it out and tucked it into my pajama pants. Crept back down the hallway. Now I can hear the guy messing with the door, so when I peek around the corner, he's no longer looking in the window. I bolt as fast as my sick little body would allow me, through the kitchen and then up the stairs. The landing led right into my bedroom, where I planned on barricading myself. I figured I'd shoot the guy if he came upstairs, and if that didn't deter him, I'd have to use the hatchet once he got inside. In my head it was foolproof, but something told me to stop. Something better occurred to me then. Instead of my room, I went around the corner and towards the creepy bathroom at the end of the hall. It felt crazy, but something told me this was the best plan. I stopped and went to the bathroom. I slid the window open as quietly as I could. I knew if I could fit through the opening. I knew the roof was easy to walk over from there. I'd snuck onto the roof a number of times this way, and I know if I crept around, I'd be able to see the front door. I pulled myself through, tiptoed along the roof, careful not to stand too tall or step too loudly. Honestly, the guy was an adult. He might be able to just climb right up the roof without a problem. I wanted to get the drop on this guy though. After a few steps, I came around and lo and behold, there he is, still working on the door. He's got a screwdriver, a credit card, a coat hanger, literally a kit the guys would have from Home Alone. It was cartoonish. The guy even had crazy hair and goofy clothes, like pants that were way too high. It was obvious this person was a stranger. In the moment, I wish I'd grabbed the telephone just to dial 911, and I realized that I had no idea what this guy was actually capable of. But he was desperate enough to get inside our house. It sounds crazy, but I swear it's the only thing that I could think of. I began shouting video game quotes at this asshole, the toughest ones that I could remember from whatever games were out at the time. Obviously, I added a string of profanities, and when I first started shouting, the guy almost jumped out of his skin. Seeing him scared in just that brief moment opened up a whole new confidence in me. I started pelting him with paintballs. The chest, the hands, the face, the throat. I shot him everywhere, black and blue, literally. He was only 15 or 20 feet away, and I shot that thing every day at that point in my life. I could hit a dog turd at 50 paces. A full-grown man was an easy target. I'll never forget how he started screaming, like top of the lungs screaming. I think he thought I was shooting him for real, as those old single-pump paintball guns were loud as hell when they fired. Add that instant sting that he felt. He probably thought it was real for a second or two. Either way, he danced out of my sight. He composed himself, then started hollering threats of all kinds. He was saying them all in this deep, creepy voice that he didn't have before, when he was asking me to open up the house. I ran around to the other side of the roof, and by God, there he was, stalking around the opposite corner. I didn't even need to tell you that I let this guy up again, but this time he just booked it and jumped over the fence. He walked back to the little creek that separated some houses, rinsed the paint off of him, then wandered up the road. And you can believe I watched him for every step of that. Once he disappeared, I ran fast as hell inside, never dropping my weapons, and got a hold of our phone. I wanted to call the cops, but just opted to call my mom instead. She worked much closer and would be able to get home in at least a little bit quicker. I told her everything, and she called my dad. They both showed up not much later. I broke down at this point, as the reality set in that I was actually in danger. The story actually gets kind of crazier. The guy that was looking in the window, he apparently wasn't bullshitting. Someone had been in our house the day before, and my parents were keyed into it because some stuff had been moved around the house. They noticed an open window in their bedroom. Some of the books were moved around, clothes moved too, and someone had a cigarette out in their bathroom sink. They knew it wasn't us kids. Obviously, neither of us smoked. They made sure to lock the doors, but other than that, they really didn't know what to make of it. It turns out that guy who peeked in our window had been casing houses up and down our neighborhood. 2 or 3 had already been robbed, and a 4th summer home, but over a dozen had been probed and valued, including ours. He would come up to a house, go through as much of their belongings as possible before being discovered, then come back the next day right when everyone was leaving and get what he wanted. He didn't account for me staying home that day, my parents locking everything up after having that first weird experience. I'm so glad that I live in the time that I do, as you can imagine. I have cameras everywhere now, security to the max, and a big .357 revolver instead of that paintball gun. All thanks to that childhood weirdo. Just a couple of years back, I lived in this big house with a bunch of other guys. We all split rent because it was way cheaper. Everyone was short on cash due to attending college. Everyone except for me. Out of the 5 dudes that lived there, I was the only one not enrolled at the local university. One of the guys that lived there just happened to be a buddy of mine. I was looking for a room to rent near my job, and they just happened to have the space. It worked out well for me because I was very bad with my money, and I really couldn't afford much of anything. As you can imagine, it got pretty rowdy pretty quickly. Every weekend brought a mini block of parties into our house, and we were absolutely there for it. Alcohol, drugs, dozens and dozens of guys and girls. I hit the jackpot, as these guys had such a good network through the college. We never went without, and always made sure to stay consistent. If it was Friday or Saturday night, our doors were wide open, even if one of us were sick or something. We had FOMO bad, and worried that if we missed a weekend, everyone would find another place to let loose. Wanted to keep as much of the party at our house as possible. It only took one bad night for all that FOMO to go away. The house itself wasn't even the same afterward, and I ended up moving out not long after. The other guys had to live there because their income was limited. Their names were on the lease, and it was that close to school. I had the freedom to save up and get out of Dodge at the moment that I was ready. Honestly, I can't remember which night it was, but the house was lit and the walls were all thrumming with music, the dancing, the shouting, all of it. It was literally a rave in our living room, a high-end bar in the kitchen, as of course 2 of our roommates worked as bartenders, so they knew how to mix a drink and set the ambience. I'm talking smoke machines, costumes, all kinds of fun shit. Stepping into the kitchen was like stepping into a casino lounge or something. A couple of the guys would theme their bedrooms each week. So one room would be like a jungle or a spaceship or something, which only kind of added to the ambience. It also upped their chances of maybe getting a girl to spend the night with them. I can honestly say with a clear, conscious mind that this group of dudes was honest and totally legit, would never hurt anyone or lure them into a sketchy situation. It's one of the main reasons so many people were happy to come and party with us. It was always clean, fun, no drama, no weirdness, nothing. Just music, booze, and a good time. The night progressed as it usually did, but around, maybe 11 p.m. or midnight, there was some ruckus in the backyard. We had this big lot with grass, a little patio, fire pit, the whole kit and caboodle. And you have to remember that these weekends, I was totally blitzed, so a lot of the finer details would escape me. I can tell you that there was never any ruckus at our shindigs, so the second that we heard something escalating out back, we knew we had to take a look. 5 of us lived there, but only 2 of us, me and one of the bartenders, went out to investigate. There was a little ring of people, so the commotion was easy to find. 2 guys were squared off in some kind of shouting match and had been getting physical. It was obvious as their clothes and hair were all messed up. One guy looked a little more clean cut, and the bartender happened to know him, so he took him aside to get the story. I kept my eye on the crowd, but mostly the guy involved in the scuffle. I don't really know how else to say this, but he looked weird. His hair was long and scraggly. His beard was so unevenly trimmed that I almost thought it was on purpose. He had dirty, baggy clothing, no shoes, and the more I looked, the more I was sure we didn't know this guy. It occurred to me that our parties might get a little big. Now and then, the wrong people on campus were starting to catch word they could get plastered pretty much for free. As I'm inspecting this guy, we make eye contact, and he's staring holes through me. "What's up, man? What's going on out here?" I float over to him. "Nothing. Mind your business. Just a misunderstanding," he explained. I've had one too many at this point, and I remember getting agitated to the point of violence. Mind my business? Okay. This is my house, my party. You get it? You're making problems directly for me. So if I ask you what's going on, you need to tell me because it's my business more than it's your business. You feel me? He starts taking a couple of steps over to me, which frankly I wasn't really prepared for, but I didn't bow out though. I felt seething rage pumping just under my skin, and this guy just didn't seem to care. At this point, the bartender roommate and his buddy come back over, as well as another girl. It turns out the buddy is a pretty straight-laced dude, and the lady is his girlfriend. They both corroborated the whole thing. They said the weird guy was being weird, dancing all over the backyard, and starts singing, but not in English. Like the craziest speech that you've ever heard, but sing-songy. After he started to fade out and starts bumping into people before spilling a drink on his buddy's girlfriend, apologizing, then trying to clean it off her chest with his bare hands. This all gets explained, and I turn back to the guy, who's now looking between all of us. He hasn't backed down though, still has this crazy look in his eyes. "How about it, bud?" I asked. "Does that sound like what happened?" The guy immediately starts to argue, gets even more agitated. He looked around and saw the multitude of people closing in, literally from every angle. We'd been throwing ragers for 4 months at this point, so a lot of these people had become our friends. The guy realized he was outgunned, starts to defuse, starts pointing fingers at us, saying that we cultivated a toxic environment, all kinds of this new age crap. We let him get his stuff together and then booted him right out the front door. Nothing physical, but we were very clear that he ever came back again, we'd call the cops. That would be the least of his worries. After that, everything went back to normal. Music, dancing, drinking, drugs. And this happened to be one of those nights where I really cut loose, especially after bouncing that weirdo. Within 30 minutes of closing the door behind him, I slammed 3 shots and did a couple of lines of blow. To say I was feeling good was kind of an understatement. Not just from the substance, but from clowning that asshole from earlier. Something about the way he stepped to me immediately just rubbed me wrong. And obviously, I was still thinking about him. Then the come down started. People started trickling out one by one at first, then in little clusters. I found myself lounging with a few people that were usually the last to go, mostly because the party didn't really stop for them. They were the cocaine plug, and were always bringing 8-balls. Because of their choice of substance, they weren't just going to leave our house and go home. No, they just went on this constant cycle from all different clubs and house parties near the university. While getting high with that crowd, I hadn't noticed that a couple of my roommates actually left with some of the guests. The 2 bartenders left with a couple of girls. My personal friend and the guy that got me the room left with some dudes going to another party just down the street. That left me and the last roommate, and he was already blacked out in his bedroom. Me, I was riding the wave of alcohol in my bloodstream. The stimulant shaved right off the block. The drug plugs said farewell and moseyed out the front door and left me alone with the buzzing bass lines and fading fog from the kitchen. There was no chance of me going to sleep. I didn't have to work the next day, so I decided to get a jump on cleaning up the house. This was usually done as a unit, but since I was coked up and alone, I just tackled it solo. I started with the cups, alcohol bottles, various forms of trash. I had 2 very full trash bags after a half an hour. I drank beer and whiskeys as I worked, just to keep the party alive just a little longer, take the edge off the drugs that were rapidly leaving my system. That's when I heard my roommate move around. I looked down the hall and there it was again, but it actually wasn't coming from the guy's room that was still inside the house. It was coming from one of the bartender's room. the corner space with the windows that faced the street. I thought for a second that maybe I was confused, that he hadn't left and was still putzing around in his room. It wasn't uncommon for this particular roommate to disappear into his room. He played a lot of World of Warcraft at the time. There was a part of me that needed a visual on whatever that noise was, as it seemed to be getting louder with each passing moment. That part was probably paranoia from the drugs. I grabbed some stuff off the counter, a zip-up hoodie and a phone charger that belonged to the roommate in question, then went down our hall. I was taking kind of loud steps, even bumped into the wall, so he would know I was coming to that end of the house. It wasn't uncommon for us to accidentally walk in on each other in various states of undress. I get to the end of the hall and his door is partially open. Cool. I push it open with my foot, and who do I see? Not the guy who lives in this room. Not even someone who lives in the damn house. It's that asshole from earlier, and he cracks a smile the second our eyes meet. The sound I was hearing was his half-assed attempt to climb through the window, failing to deal with the blinds in any way other than banging against them. They were those cheap old 90s office classic little thin rattly metal ones, and they were currently bent and broken beyond repair, as the guy breaking in had one arm through them. I wish I could say I ran up and threw his ass back out the window, but the paranoia festering in my head turned into full panic. I threw the jacket and phone charger down, kind of into the room, and booked it back the way I came. I had no idea what to do and just wanted to make some space between me and whoever the hell this dude really was. I looked behind me and I swear to God this creep was in slow-mo, walking through the fog and the smoke, lingering in the hall, with that same crazy grin. Only when I looked down did I see his hands was gripping something, white-knuckled and shaking. It's dark and foggy, so I couldn't really make it out, but the shape was wrench-like, or maybe the length of a pipe, something to bludgeon. I bolt around the corner and into the kitchen and look over the knife magnet. We were edgy and liked having showy decor like that, so all of our chef knives hung on these cool bamboo boards that we put up on the wall. I low-key had run this kind of scenario in my head before and knew exactly which blade I was going to go for, the clean, shiny, razor-sharp fillet knife. If you aren't familiar, it's the little skinny one in the block, probably 6 or 7 inches long, and it's used for cutting fat off beef or filleting fish, whatever kind of precise slicing that you need. It's shiny in our house because we rarely used it. I just remember in high school working at a restaurant in the neighborhood, being taught about different knives for different jobs, which ones perform best. Fillet knives are usually the sharpest and have the greatest ability to penetrate. My plan was to bury that whole blade in this guy's neck or collarbone when he came around the corner. He would be decommissioned without a doubt. It was more violent than I usually am, but I was caught off guard in a pretty unstable state of mind. Either way, I remember my roommate was in the house. "Derek! Derek!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I was getting ready to say wake up when I realized the guy in the house A, didn't know I was alone, and B, didn't know Derek was sleeping. "There's a guy in the house! The guy we kicked out earlier! Let's get his ass!" No response, of course. The steps I could hear coming down the hall paused though. I think my bluff was working, or at least so I thought. I remember our exchange earlier that night and felt that rage come back. I could see the sun starting to come up through the windows now. "Derek!" I tried again. I heard the sweetest thing then. He called my name back. He wasn't as blackout as I thought. His room was just behind where the guy was, so I pretty much had him in a corner. Suddenly, I could hear them wrestling around just down the hall. I ran up and turned to look. Derek had the guy wrapped up from behind. The pipe was laying on the floor, so I took that the guy was now unarmed and ran up on him, straight on. Big mistake though. He was coherent enough and flexible enough that he pushed me back and kicked me right in the face. I'm not a particularly tall guy, and this dude had legs for days. I fell sideways into the wall, dropped the knife, thank God, which fell harmlessly to the tile and clattered away from us. This dude starts howling, which was scary as hell, but actually kind of brought me back into the moment. Kind of like the couple explained earlier about his singing. He was screaming weird words neither of us have ever heard before. I got back to my feet and helped Derek take the guy to the floor. Then he told me to run and call the cops. That idea had never even occurred to me, probably because of all the drugs that I'd done. It felt like calling the cops on my own party. Eventually they did come though, along with some EMTs, and they cuffed and diagnosed him, with a little help from the guy's confession. He was high on LSD the whole night. He was wandering around the uni campus, frying on acid, when he overheard some people talking about the party at our house. They hopped inside their car and left. In his hallucinating state of mind, this guy managed to navigate the neighborhood until he found that same damn car parked in front of our house. Like I said, we were very near the college. They took the guy away, and Derek and I declined to go to the hospital. I was already sobering up and thanking God that I wasn't going to jail. Derek was desperate to get back to bed. We weren't injured too badly, and that kick to my face was pretty superficial, as it was toes against forehead. We both popped some ibuprofen, drank a beer, and iced ourselves for a bit before hitting the sack. Like I said at the start, I didn't live there for much longer after this. There was nothing personal with the guys. I still hung out with them occasionally, but I didn't really want to puke where I ate, if you know what I mean. I didn't want to live in the same place the party was happening. That night taught me a lot about myself and what I'm cut out for. Drugs, paranoia, and late night stalkers. It turns out that it wasn't for me. I was around 16 years old at the time. It happened in the suburbs of New Jersey. It was about 8 p.m. and completely dark outside. I was alone in the apartment where my aunt and I lived on the 4th floor of a very old apartment building in a very tiny complex. The front doors to the stairwell were supposed to have buzzers and locks, but that was a joke. They clearly hadn't been in operation since 1956. When you looked out the living room window, they looked down on the parking lot. The walls were paper thin, and the windows seemed to be single pane because you could hear everything going on out there. You could especially hear when a car arrived. It was second nature to look out the window at the sound of a car because, well, we're so nosy, I guess. That night, I heard the sound of a very loud pickup truck. My uncles lived just down the road, and both drove pickup trucks and visited regularly. So I got up to check the window to see if it was one of them. This time it was not. It was a beat-up old Chevy truck with rust all over the place. Inside were 2 teenagers. The second I came to the window, the driver pointed straight at me, as though he absolutely knew who he was looking for and where I was. Now that freaked me the hell out, and I took a step back. I was about to walk into the other room and just try to shake it off when there was a pounding on the apartment door. All I could think was, the hell? I walked over to the door as quietly as I could, trying to step on the rug and not the wood floor. I leaned to the door without touching it. I held my breath as I looked through the peephole. I couldn't believe what I was now seeing. Out there in the stairwell were 2 very agitated-looking teenage boys. They were twitchy and jumpy, clearly on something, and one of them was holding a Home Depot bucket. And here's where my brain must have snapped into some sort of dissociative panic mode that would come back to haunt me later. In the bucket, there was duct tape, a rope, a hammer, some wood, and a long, serrated-looking knife, like the kind you use to cut spray foam to make it smooth. I pulled back from the door immediately. My brain was going 1,000 miles an hour. For just the briefest of moments, I thought, there's no way this is real. There's no way they're just carrying a bucket of these murder tools right out in the open for me to see. It's so stupid. This has to be some sort of joke. Yeah, it has to be. I went to the peephole again to try to get a good look at them, and I didn't recognize either one. Let me tell you how significant this was for me. I was pretty well liked at my high school. I moved between social groups very easily. I got along with everybody. I got to know pretty much everybody, and everybody got to know me. Part of this, I believe, is because I came into high school with my self-confidence guns blazing. I had spent horrific years in middle school being bullied relentlessly for being a lesbian. When I got to high school, I swore I would never let anyone use that weapon against me ever again. So on the first day of 9th grade, when it was time to get up and introduce ourselves in the class, I said, "Hi, my name is insert name. I like girls." People were really impressed. They actually loved it. They loved how open I was, and they loved that they could ask me questions about anything, Looking back, part of me wonders if all my cocky confidence blinded me to the fact that perhaps I made myself a target. When I realized I didn't know either of these guys, and that they were not friends playing some kind of weird prank, my heart sank even further. Now you would think the most common sense thing to do at this point would be to call the police, and you're right, it would be. But of course that's not what I did. You see, I knew that if I called the police and my aunt found out about this, I would never have a moment to myself ever again. My aunt was already hyper paranoid about child abductions, child molestation, pretty much anything she could ever watch on a Lifetime movie turned into concrete fear for her every day. I can't tell you what it took to convince her that I, a 16-year-old, would be okay in an apartment by myself for a few hours in the evening. So of course, my selfish, stupid teenage brain put that in priority over, staying alive. Through the peephole, I could see that one of them had stopped bouncing and twitching long enough to slowly lean his head towards the door, trying to listen for movement inside. I knew this was my chance. The second his ear touched the door, I pulled my hand back and slammed the door right where his ear was, and let out the deepest, most guttural shriek that I've ever made in my entire life. He fell backward. His friend tripped over him. They grabbed each other and started fumbling down the stairs. I got all the way to the floor and peeked through the very bottom blinds of the front window to see the truck peeling right out of there, tires smoking. Not one neighbor came out to see if I was okay, and I know they heard me. That was just as terrifying as the experience that I just had. I could hear on a regular basis when my neighbor to the left would sneeze too loudly, but none of them heard me screaming. Yeah, okay. I never saw those guys or that truck ever again, and despite how long I've made this story, the entire incident couldn't have taken more than 8 minutes from start to finish. I completely believe that seeing that bucket full of murder weapons was the moment my brain went into self-preservation mode. And because there was no aftermath, because there was no repercussions, and because I didn't talk to this about anyone, it started to feel even less real as time moved on. I questioned it over and over. Did this really happen to me? But I know it happened. It was just so damn weird and unexpected that my brain didn't have the neat little compartment to put it in. The pestering question is why? Was it actually random, or was it actually targeted? And they even know that I was home alone. I'm retired now, but I worked as an inspector for both private companies and the county throughout my career. I was working on my own at the time, taking freelance business to see if I could keep myself afloat without a big company behind me. Things were going pretty well, but because of the nature of my position, I was taking calls I might not normally field. Odd jobs as they were called in my industry. Appraisals for dilapidated buildings, inspections of DIY builds, stuff like that. People wanted me to flub stuff essentially. While I was on one such job, I met someone that I didn't really want to meet. I was asked by a private home builder to inspect a house halfway through its construction, and then they would submit my inspection to the county. But I think they were going to submit it as a fully finished building or something to that effect. There was some kind of racket going on, but from my end, it was just a paycheck. I get to the house, which was sort of on this back end of a development, away from the rest of the new builds, most of which were going through the big part of corporate projects, where 10 or 20 of the same house would go up into a neighborhood, all owned by the same entity. Then there were outliers, where private buyers got property and built their own custom single-family designs. That's what I was going to go inspect out here. It was honestly a great property and an awesome home, but it gave off a vibe of fraud, almost like mob style. I get inside and start doing my job, wandering around with a clipboard and a flashlight. It's pretty routine, up until I get to the back end of the house. I can hear something. There seems to be trash scattered in some of the rooms, and I hear a buzzing, like a radio or something. Then it hits me. There's probably a contractor here, someone finishing up the drywall or something to that effect. I peek into the master bedroom, and inside I spot a woman. She's dirty, somewhat around 30 or 35, and she's definitely not working on the property. "Excuse me, are you supposed to be in here?" I asked, hoping she was the homebuyer's wife or something. "Of course I am. What are you doing in my house?" she replied. I'm the home inspector. I scheduled with her husband and the contractor to do a full walkthrough. I guess I didn't realize anyone would be here." She grumbled and gave me some kind of response, then vanished into the bathroom area. Not all of the drywall was up, so I could still see her feet and arms as she shuffled around, continuing to make these weird noises. At this point, I was kind of creeped out and was ready to get the hell out of there. This was well before pocket cell phone, so I was on my own out there, at least until I could get back to my car. I hadn't encountered much in the way of weird at this point in my career, and this lady was about to culture me with a great deal, if you catch my drift. She came back from the bathroom with the biggest kitchen knife that I've ever seen and planted it right through a piece of hanging drywall. I took a step back out of pure instinct and did my best to ask her what the hell she was doing. What came out sounded something like, "What, why, what is it you're doing?" She didn't miss a beat though. "I don't have a husband, so I think you need to leave." I look around the floor. I see the trash for what it really is. Pack rat stuff, food wrappers, tissues, toilet paper. This lady is crazy and homeless, and she's just moved in. By the look of it, she's been crashing here for at least a couple of days. Probably hasn't had a care in the world. Now, the only thing to piss her off is me, and I'm stuck here with her. All right, simple logic prevails. Time to go. I tuck my clipboard up on a shelf, check my pockets for my car keys, and begin back up towards the exit. "Don't leave your pictures here. They'll want those back at the station," she says, pointing at my clipboard. I shake my head and raise my hands to show them that they're empty, and I keep moving backward. She doesn't like this. She starts breathing weird, like super hard and deep. I take my own deep breath and go back to grab that clipboard. Anything to mediate the mood. This triggers her even worse somehow. This lady starts screaming like a banshee. She takes a run at me, and it scares me so bad that I almost fall backwards. I only caught myself by the threshold of the door, which I can firmly say held my weight. A+ for construction on my inspection so far. Thankfully, she stopped short. Didn't really charge fully at me, but her screaming has created another sound, something out of place. I turn to find a man, a little older than the girl, shamble out from a closet, or some partially finished nook. He's shirtless, tattooed, and gaunt. Definitely a junkie. "You woke me up," he said. "You shouldn't be here. Why'd you wake me up?" I tried to answer, but what the hell was I gonna say to this guy? I could tell by his look, logic, it wasn't gonna speak to him. Then the woman came back down the hall from where they were standing and had me kinda cornered. "He says my husband sent him," she said. "Threw me right under the bus." Then the guy starts to lose it, flexing, bugging out, hyperventilating, that sort of thing. He starts pressing me about how her husband found them, where he was, and if he was close. Total druggy paranoia. I assured them that I didn't know the guy. I had no business with them. I was just there to simply look over the house. I made a mistake and got the wrong address, and I would be on my way out without any more issues. They'd never see me again. Apparently, at least from what I gleaned, they were on the run from this lady's husband. He was a drug dealer, and they owed him a boatload of cash. They were on their way out of the city on foot, and they spotted the partial build on its own. It became their little cracked-in haven for at least 48 hours. It didn't matter though. They wouldn't let it go. They were beyond convinced that I was a resp for her husband. I'd found them, and now someone needed to make a move. It was by far the scariest standoff that I could imagine, as I wasn't prepared to take on not one, but two agitated crackheads. As they closed in, it occurred to me that the only ace up my sleeve was the crap that they were telling themselves. I had to go with a lie, and the second that I did, they completely changed gears. "Your husband isn't gonna like any of this. You know he's outside, right?" Both of their jaws immediately hit the floor, and then they sprinted over to the window to do what junkies do. Peep through the blinds, work that window like a true crazy person, see what's out there. I proceeded to back through the house until I made some distance, then ran as quick as I could to get back to my car. I was horrified when I looked up to find them chasing me across the front yard. They were much paler and thinner than I first pegged them for inside the house. Out in the sun, they were even creepier. Because of their look, I dropped my keys in the dirt before I could even unlock my car. All I could do was snatch them up and start running again, aiming for the next cluster of new builds. I saw a couple of trucks parked near them earlier, so I was praying to myself a construction crew would be nearby, anyone normal to help me even out the teams. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to run very far, and I stayed well ahead of the junky house dwellers, but they still didn't give up the chase. I spilled into the nearest house, and right there, a crew of 5 guys met me with hammers and saws, asking me what the hell I was up to. It was exactly what I wanted to see. I explained that I was a home inspector, was working next door. Some druggies inside caught me off guard and chased me over here. They gave me the green light, and they went outside to confront the duo on the lawn. It went exactly how you would expect it to. The crack twins started telling some crazy-ass story, and the construction guys snapped them both up and put them on the ground, called the nearest police station. They sat on top of them until the cops arrived, at which point I had to clarify my story a little bit more. The whole thing was absolutely wild, and they got hauled off with their belongings. I said a big thanks to the work team that saved me, even dropped a few gift cards off for them later on that week. There was minimal damage to the house, except for the bathroom that they were hiding out in. It had the craziest graffiti that you could imagine. I swear it looked like it was painted in blood, carved out with a knife, and straight burned into the wood and drywall. It was something out of a movie. All insane devil worship stuff, I think. I've always felt like I got away pretty lucky that day, as they both seemed pretty strung out as I did my walkthrough. Had I caught them when they were more coherent, who knows what could have happened. Hey everyone, thanks for listening if you stuck around at this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on X, Twitter, whatever, and Instagram. I have a Facebook, but I don't really use it very often. All of these links are below. Hope you enjoyed this episode, ye all. Haven't done a Home Alone in a couple of months, and thought it was time, you know? Kevin McAllister thought it was time for it, you know, now that Marv and Harry were coming back for round 3 and 4 or whatever. So I enjoyed these stories, and I hope you did too. Let's see. Next week, well, actually, Stories for Sleep Volume 9 will be out on Sunday night. And reminder for anyone and everyone, mostly to the newcomers, if you don't understand, Stories for Sleep are an episode, or is an episode, where I just compile, you know, the last 4, 5, 6, sometimes more. Jesus Christ, it scared me. I don't know what the hell that was. Compile all those stories from previous episodes together in one nice, long, thick boy for people that like to use these for sleep. So yeah, keep that in mind. That'll be out on Sunday night. And then next week we got, I can't remember the 2 topics, but they're really good. I promise. And those will be out Tuesday, Thursday. Keep in mind, I know I've said it many times as well. There will always be 2 episodes out a week. It might not happen exactly on Tuesdays and Thursdays like ideally I want it to. Sometimes it might be like this week where it's Wednesdays and Fridays, or Mondays and Wednesdays, but there will always be 2 episodes out per week unless something comes up that's unavoidable. Trying to think if there's anything else notable outside of that, which I really don't think so. Yeah, I'm gonna shut up now, I guess, and get some stuff done and do the damn thing, and get ready for tomorrow's UFC card, because it's gonna be really badass for those of you that care and are gonna watch it too. But yeah, anyway, all right guys, that's it, that's all. I'm gonna go now. It's been fun, it's been real. Have a good one. We'll see ya in the next one, and then on Sunday for Volume 9, Scary Stories for Sleep. Yeah, all right, cheers.